Why do so many of us believe the United States bought Alaska for just pennies on the dollar? It's a story we've all heard. A piece of trivia that makes for a great headline. The ultimate real estate deal. A vast, frozen wilderness acquired for pocket change. The number often thrown around is 2 cents an acre. It sounds like the steal of the century, a lopsided bargain so absurd it's almost comical. But what if that simple narrative, the one of shrewd American negotiators outsmarting a desperate Russian empire, is just that, a simple narrative? The real story is far more complex, more strategic, and infinitely more fascinating than a mere bargain. It's a tale of geopolitical chess, imperial ambition, and a calculated gamble that would redefine the map of the world. The proof isn't just in the price tag. It's hidden in the context, in the motivations of empires, and in the foresight of a few powerful men. This is the story behind the receipt they forgot to mention in history class. To understand the sale, we have to travel back to the mid-19th century. The Russian Empire, under Tsar Alexander II, was a colossal power, but it was an empire under strain. The recent and humiliating defeat in the Crimean War of the 1850s had laid bare its weaknesses. The conflict had drained the treasury and demonstrated a painful truth. Russia's navy couldn't compete with Great Britain's. This was a critical problem for their North American colony, Russian America, the territory we now call Alaska. It was remote, sparsely populated by Russian settlers, and incredibly difficult to defend. From St. Petersburg, Alaska looked less like an asset and more like a liability, a piece of land they were destined to lose. The Tsar's advisors, particularly his brother, Grand Duke Constantine, feared that in any future conflict with their great rival, Britain, the Royal Navy would simply sail in and seize the territory. Selling it seemed better than losing it for nothing. Furthermore, the colony itself was no longer a cash cow. The Russian-American company, which had managed the territory, had decimated the sea otter populations, its primary source of wealth from the fur trade. The colony was expensive to maintain, and its profits were plummeting. Russia needed cash to fund domestic reforms, including the emancipation of the serfs. The decision was made. It was time to sell. But to whom? Selling to their rival Britain was unthinkable. That left one logical buyer, the United States. On the other side of the world, America was emerging from its own brutal conflict, the Civil War. The nation was focused on healing and reconstruction, but some leaders were already looking outward. Chief among them was Secretary of State William H. Seward. A fervent believer in manifest destiny, Seward envisioned an American empire that dominated the continent and extended its influence across the Pacific. He saw the United States as a future global power, and to him, Alaska wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was a strategic gateway to Asia, a vital northern anchor for American naval power, and a land brimming with untold resources. He had been interested in acquiring the territory for years. So, in 1867, the stage was set. The Russian minister to the United States, Eduard de Stuckel, was given the green light from the Tsar to open negotiations. He approached Seward, who was more than ready to listen. The negotiations were remarkably swift, a testament to how motivated both sides were. Stuckel's initial, informal asking price was $10 million. Seward countered with $5 million. They settled at $7 million, with Stuckel persuading Seward to add another $200,000 to the price, a sum that would later become the subject of much speculation. The final deal was struck late on the night of March 29, 1867. Eager to finalize the treaty, Seward didn't want to wait until morning. He woke his staff. Stuckel summoned his, and they worked through the night at the State Department. By 4 o'clock in the morning on March 30th, the treaty was signed. For $7.2 million, the United States was to acquire 586,000 square miles of land. But signing the treaty was only the first hurdle. Seward now had to convince the Senate to ratify it and the House of Representatives to approve the funding. This was no easy task. The country was war-weary and deeply in debt. President Andrew Johnson was immensely unpopular and facing impeachment. The idea of spending millions on a distant, icy territory struck many as absurd. The press had a field day. They derided the purchase with a slew of mocking nicknames: Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. Newspapers published cartoons depicting America as a fool, burdened with a giant iceberg. They claimed the land was worthless, home to nothing but ice, polar bears, and a few Eskimo people. The public, reading these reports, was largely convinced it was a colossal mistake. Seward, however, launched a powerful lobbying campaign. He found a crucial ally in Senator Charles Sumner, the influential chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Sumner was initially skeptical, but after intense study and persuasion from Seward, he became the treaty's greatest champion. On April 9th, he delivered a masterful 3-hour speech to the Senate, laying out in exhaustive detail the territory's potential resources, furs, fisheries, timber, and minerals, and its immense strategic importance. His speech was decisive. The Senate ratified the treaty by a vote of 37-2. Getting the money from the House of Representatives took over a year of political wrangling, but it was eventually approved. The payment was made, but not without controversy. Minister Stucco later claimed he spent over $100,000 of the purchase money bribing congressmen and journalists to support the deal. A claim that has never been definitively proven but adds another layer of intrigue to the story. For decades it seemed the critics were right. Alaska was remote and difficult to govern. It was largely ignored by the federal government, a vast and empty district. Seward's folly remained a popular punchline. But then, something gleamed in the cold northern streams. In 1896, gold was discovered in the Klondike region of Canada, right on the Alaskan border. Suddenly, tens of thousands of prospectors flooded north, using Alaskan ports like Skagway and Dyea as their gateways to the goldfields. The Klondike Gold Rush, and subsequent gold strikes within Alaska itself, transformed the territory. It brought people, infrastructure, and investment. That so-called folly was now hiding gold, and it paid for itself many times over. Yet, the true genius of Seward's purchase wasn't just about resources. It was about location. During World War II, this became terrifyingly clear. The Japanese invasion of the Aleutian Islands in 1942 was the first time enemy forces had occupied American soil since the War of 1812. Alaska was suddenly the front line. The U.S. military poured resources into the territory, building the Alaska Highway and a network of airfields. General Billy Mitchell had famously told Congress in 1935, "He who holds Alaska will hold the world." Now, everyone understood why. This strategic importance only intensified during the Cold War. Alaska's proximity to the Soviet Union made it America's northern shield. The Distant Early Warning Line, or DEW line, a string of radar stations across the Arctic, was built to detect incoming Soviet bombers and missiles. For 50 years, Alaska stood as a silent, frozen sentinel in the tense standoff between two superpowers. Today, its position on the globe makes it critical for monitoring the increasingly strategic and navigable Arctic shipping lanes. So let's bust the central myth. The price, $7.2 million in 1867. It sounds like nothing, but in today's money, that's roughly $150 million. Still a fantastic deal, but not the pocket change of popular myth. More importantly, it represented about 2% of the entire U.S. federal budget at the time. Imagine the government today spending 2% of its budget, hundreds of billions of dollars, to buy a vast, sparsely populated territory. It would be a massive political fight. The 2 cents per acre figure is technically true, but it's a misleading metric that ignores the context of the time and the real financial and political capital Seward had to spend. For nearly a century, Alaska remained a territory, its residents lacking full representation. But its role in World War II and the Cold War elevated its status and pushed the case for statehood. Finally, on January 3, 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the proclamation, and Alaska became the 49th state of the Union. The former Russian colony, the supposed folly, was now a full and vital part of the United States. So, that tiny receipt for $7.2 million? It wasn't the bill for a foolish impulse buy. It was the down payment on a future no one but a visionary like Seward could fully imagine. It was a strategic masterstroke that removed a rival empire from the continent, secured untold natural resources, and gave the United States an unshakable foothold in the North Pacific and the Arctic. The story of the Alaska Purchase is a powerful reminder that history's greatest bargains are rarely obvious at the time. It shows that value isn't always immediate. Sometimes it's measured in gold rushes, oil booms, and the silent vigil of radar stations decades later. The purchase looked ridiculous until it became indispensable. It proves that in the grand ledger of history, the price tag often tells only half the story. The other half is written in vision, strategy, and the patient unfolding of time.